I was always curious with either Parental Discretion is Advised or the grand finale. Did the symphony influence or inspire you guys to want to do those, or did they just come organically? The
I think
posse.
probably a little of both. One, you can you have to be aware that the symphony was out. It was a huge record, and it was dope as fuck, and it was the Juice Crew. But Parental Discretion, like Parental Discretion, and the grand finale are kind of the same record. It's just from two separate artists. It makes it seem like one is an N.W.A. record with me on it, and one is me on it with an N.W.A. record. You know what I mean? But yeah, we had to be inspired by those guys. We were the East Coast period. Chuck D and those guys. Those guys were a huge part of our early development. I think Q-Tip and those guys were a huge part of Dre's development going forward. Like the East Coast has always been a huge deal. In fact, you were talking about the Doc and the Doctor. There's a song called Together Forever by Run-DMC. And from my perspective, the Doc and the Doctor is just our version of Together Forever.
Together Forever. Yep. Interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that, but that's interesting to put it that way. And given the evolution of rap, and even at the time, I remember thinking with No One Can Do It Better that you had actual 5 legitimate singles: The Doc and the Doctor, It's Funky Enough / No One Can Do It Better, but then it was Mind Blowing, The Formula, Portrait of a Masterpiece. So back then, even if all those didn't make it to videos, that's a lot of singles, a lot of promotion, a lot of exposure. And I think fast forward even 5 to 10 years, a lot of albums didn't get 5 single releases. So what and why do you think you were able to get that, and then that things changed not too long after that?
It's hard to say. They were good records, The art was really beginning to blow up. I think they had identified me as that guy, and they were finna push it all the way up the hill. And you never said Let the Bass Go. I thought that would have been a great scene. Let the Bass Go. I love that record.
I agree. And with the Doc and the Doctor, even still, you had Something to Bump in Your Car that wasn't on the album as well. Which on the one hand I always liked because it wasn't, you had to know to look for it. On the other hand, I was always disappointed with those songs. So do you remember the business decision of why you guys did that?
No, that had to have been if it was a business decision, that means it was an easy decision. So, and I can't remember why we did the record, but I enjoyed it. I think Dre and I were really just, we just liked the production. Back in those days, when you was driving around with those subs in the back of your car, that one was a big one.
When you could feel the music, literally.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. So a couple other things I wanted to know too. With moving on and working with N.W.A. after the accident and after Cube leaving, there was so much that had happened that with the Brothers for Life album, the tone of it is very different from Straight Outta Compton, and it's not it's far darker, I would say, just the whole aesthetic of the project. And thank you again. You gave me a great interview for my book, The History of Gangster Rap, but you had told me in that interview that you didn't realize until later that when Cube left, N.W.A. had lost its soul. So when you were realizing, did you realize that on Brothers for Life as you were doing it, or on 100 Miles and Running, or was that later in time?
Well, you have to figure this is doing those albums, those that music. We're freshly past the accident. Like we're not even 6 months past that rate. So you can only imagine the mental space on it, right? Which is probably a lot of reason why a lot of that shit was so dark. You know, dude was in a dark place, and I was writing a lot of that stuff. And so, uh, but the spirit was gone, the direction was gone. Q was the guy that made. Q was the tip of the spear of N.W.A. Everything else could have been an Eazy-E record, basically. But Q had a real idea about what he wanted to do and where he wanted to go. That was, I think, inspired a lot by Chuck and those guys, which is probably why the natural move he made was to the Bomb Squad when he left. We were all sort of in that space. And they were still there about, bro, when you think back on it, that was a definite fork in the road, that moment in time musically. Because those two bands, just those two, what could have happened if those two cars could have been driven in the right way, so to speak.
If no one had gotten out the car. Yeah.
It was a big deal, because we were exposed to power, and we was understanding what it was. But when those things fell apart, the power just started going like a water hose with high heat, with high pressure to it, and you just let the fucking hose go. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so that's where it is today. These boys got a lot of power. It's just not concentrating. It's all over the place. And everybody's trying to look like the flyers pimp.
Well, as the saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So there you go.
Yeah, that's the Marvel universe.
Yes. So when you so that being said, and being in the mix of it, when you heard, because I think America's Most Wanted is phenomenal, but I do think Death Certificate is one of the best albums ever made, on basically every level. But for you, when you heard those back to back, and even Killer Will, of course, but when you heard those and realizing that that's no longer there, especially the political side with Death Certificate, but even like Dead Homies is phenomenal from a storytelling and a social commentary perspective. Um, from a writer's perspective, when you hear those and you know that that was your guy, he was right there, and that's not here. How did that affect you, like as a person?
Well, like I said just a couple of seconds ago, bro, the space I was in during that time, I probably don't have a whole lot of even recollection. I was just in a bad way, bro. I was just fucked up all the time, and probably making a lot of people uncomfortable, but I was functioning, meaning that I could still write well, and I developed, I didn't have a voice, but I developed a way to write the stuff out so that guys could understand it. If I put little symbols above the words and wrapped it in their ear a couple of times, I got my work done. That's all that mattered to me. But you're right, Q was, like I said, he was the tip of the spear. And America's Most was just, what you don't do. He did, he was due. And I was happy to see him win, bro. I was happy to see him win.
And did you working on the stuff you were writing yourself, given that you had the anger and the darkness, did you find that writing, generally speaking, made you more angry and more dark, or was it more therapeutic, or was it both?
Yeah, probably a little of both. Because it still feels good when you write something and you yourself know it's good. Like I don't need everybody else to know it. I know it when it's dope. Yeah, and I got those moments by writing for those other guys. Some songs that motherfuckers really like. Always into something, stuff like that. If I could stick my name in it. That's how I started remaining, in the gas. It's the only way I could make myself there was to just put myself there. And so I started doing that. And after a while, Trey was like, would you stop? Would you stop putting your name in all my fucking words? But that was my only way. And so that's another thing that I wonder if people years later will think back and go, why did they always put this guy's name in all the songs all the time? Because he was doing it. That's how I stayed in the mix. But yeah, Q was, the heart and soul, and not having him on Niggas for Life, the record suffered.
Yeah. And with the album title, putting it backwards, so many of the songs have the word in the title. And then you guys addressed it too in some of the skits and the protests and all that stuff, especially toward the beginning of the album. Was that something that you felt you guys were really facing, or was that more to fan the flames of controversy coming off Fuck the Police and everything else?
Man, that would be hard for me to say because I wasn't mentally there. I was just an employee at that point doing whatever I could to help the project be successful.